Welcome to It's Your Move, a show that may challenge how you view persons with disabilities. I'm Lisa Tarracone. This show is a production of Westchester Independent Living Center. We are a disability rights advocacy organization located right here in White Plains on 10 County Center Road. And we're also part of a national network of independent living centers. And we'll talk about the independent living philosophy in a moment. My guest tonight is Joe Bravo, Executive Director of Westchester Independent Living, and we'll say WILC for now, it's a shorter acronym. He's also my boss, and I'm his Director of Systems Advocacy there at the center. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Lisa.
Great.
Pleasure to be here today.
Absolutely, good to have you. Joe, at the beginning I mentioned that WILC is a part of an independent living network across the nation. And WILC opens its doors here in Westchester about 30 years ago. You were the founder, right? So you've been at the center 37 years. Congratulations.
37,
okay.
Yes, long time.
Absolutely. Maybe you can tell us what the independent living philosophy is and exactly how our center fulfills that mission.
I think the center started as part of a movement, coming out of the 60s and 70s, where everybody was finding themselves and people were trying to figure out where their place was in society and in the community. And I think that's what disabled people wanted to do as well. And when our center started and the independent living movement in New York State started, it was in the late 70s. Our center got started in 81.
81.
And that's when I came to the center.
And you opened the center.
I
you
did.
Founded it.
I was the founder, along with a gentleman who since has passed, Rich Manley, who really was instrumental in hiring me and getting us started.
And this is the first IL center in Westchester County.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we were one of the first 6 in New York State.
Wow, great.
So
and there's 38 right now, I think.
38 right now. Certainly the movement was about people with disabilities advocating for themselves, providing services, being peers for other people with disabilities. And that's how the program started, was really doing peer advocacy and talking to newly disabled people. For the first few years, I spent most of my time at a place like Burke Rehab Center, because there was a pool of newly disabled people with all types of disabilities, which is also what's unique about our center, is that we provide services to people no matter what the disability is. So it ranges from people in chairs to people who have cerebral palsy or people who have mental health disabilities.
And they're free services, right? They're all free
all
of
the
service.
Services are free of charge. We don't charge for any of the services.
And for the family members as well.
Family members and a number of professionals as well that will assist, who are trying to assist people with disabilities, will assist them as well. And it's a whole range of services that we can get into, but we do so many different things. That's expanded dramatically over the last 36, 37 years. But certainly at the heart of it is people with disabilities providing services to people with disabilities. And that's a core part of what the independent living centers throughout the state are about. That the majority of my board of directors, we're a not-for-profit, so the majority of the board has to be made up of people with disabilities, and the majority of the staff is made up of people with disabilities.
So it's self-directing.
All type,
instead of the medical model, which I think a lot of people feel when they look at disability, they think, dependency and independent living is about empowerment, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's really important. And who better to help you but someone who may have experienced in some ways what you're experiencing now. When I talk to somebody who's newly disabled, I was there once upon a time. I can talk to them understanding how they feel and how they don't think they can cope with a disability, which is a very natural thing that we've talked about over the years, that people, normally nobody thinks they can cope, but we can all cope. We can cope with what we need to cope with. And the center, and I think the staff, is there to try to help you figure that out early on.
Become independent, which is the whole objective,
and know that you can manage, because other people have managed. You just have to figure out what that means and how you're going to have to adjust your life. I think nothing for me was as important as meeting that first paraplegic that I met, who was a gentleman who I can remember this day. Fred was his name, and he was a paraplegic, older. I was a kid then, so older. He probably was 32 years old back then. I thought he was an old guy. I was in my teens when I became disabled. So for me, he was an old guy. and he just talked to me about how he got his chair in and out of the car, took me down to see his car and get his wheelchair in and out of his car. And as somebody who's in a chair, I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, I can drive, I can get my chair in and out of a car. And he showed me how he could do that. That, for me, to this day, I can remember those conversations I had with him so many years ago, because they were that important to me, because it was the first time I really talked to somebody that I can go, gosh, he really does understand what I'm going to be facing, and could talk to me about things that a social worker who's not disabled would not be able to share with me firsthand experience of dealing with certain things that are involved when you're in a chair or you're a paraplegic and you have to deal with life in certain ways.
And it's important to see, like you said, we're a peer-run center, right? Consumer-directed. We use the word consumer, not client. To see folks with disabilities going about their lives, and we don't really see enough of that, though, in our culture, right? In advertising, the image of disability is not really mainstreamed.
I think it's gotten better.
It's gotten better.
And we see more commercials that may have somebody in a wheelchair, somebody who's visually impaired. We'll see them more often than we ever did in the past. But still, you're right. I mean, we're still... You know, it's still unusual or uncommon when you see somebody on the street with a disability. I'm very conscious when I see somebody, I always notice, for obvious reasons. I see them, I go, oh, wow, there's somebody in a wheelchair down, going down White Plains, Road or something, on Mamaroneck Avenue. So I'm very conscious, but you still don't see it as often as you might think you would see it for the numbers of people with disabilities that exist in our community in our county of Westchester County. You're talking 90 to 100,000 people with some type of disability.
Right.
That's a large number of people, and that's probably a small estimate. It's probably higher than that.
Be higher.
But we don't see it as often. So you're right. At times, we're not consciously seeing people with disabilities. So it's still unusual for us to see it. As I said, I think it's gotten a lot better than it was, simply because of accessibility. Things are more wheelchair accessible.
Right.
We can get in and out of places.
Right, and you've seen, I mean, you were injured as a young person. You said you were 12 or so, or 13. So
yes.
Since I'm not going to give away how old you are now, but
Yes,
so 10 or 15 years ago. But you've seen actually a lot of changes, the ADA implementation, the ADA being one, but a lot of architectural changes, and attitudinal as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the architecture has been tremendous. I remember whenever we were going to go to a restaurant or we're going to go someplace, I had to call ahead of time to make sure I could get in, because too often we would show up and they were escorting me through the kitchen, which is not normally where you want to go through before you eat.
No,
is a kitchen.
I don't think you want to see that.
And it was always a side entrance or the back entrance. The entrance where they took out the garbage was the entrance where you had to go in. Well, that's not the most appetizing thing to do before you eat. Well, now I wouldn't even think of calling most restaurants. I take it for granted. I take it for granted I'm going to get in. And for the most part, you can get into almost any restaurant you want to.
So let me ask you this question. So yes, we have laws now like the ADA. We have a lot more awareness. We have centers like Wilk and others across the country. But we still have sort of attitudinal barriers. And I would think, personally, I think those are the more significant ones, more than the architectural ones. People who feel that maybe people with disabilities are dependent or they can't do a lot. I mean, at the opening of the show, we have a number of photographs that folks might have seen, if you tuned in at the beginning, with people with disabilities doing things that you probably would never think we could do. Scuba diving being one of them, right? So what do you think contributes to this attitudinal, these barriers, and how do you think independent living, or do you feel independent living is breaking those down?
I think part of it, the first part of that is when we think about when we became disabled, who did we know with a disability? There was no one in my family with a disability that I knew. And my parents knew nobody with a disability. Okay, so I was the first person that my family had to deal with in a wheelchair. So for them, it was like, wow. So I think that's part of it, that if you haven't had first-hand experience with someone, you really don't know what people are capable of. So your own idea, your own stereotype is, oh, that's someone who's needy. That's someone who's going to need something. Versus when you get to know people, I know my cousins now, after being around me for as long as they've been around me, they know that there's nothing I won't get involved in. If they ask me, you want to try this? I mean, I've always been sure. I may not be able to succeed at it, but you talk about scuba diving, skydiving, all these things were things that I always said I'm going to do because I wanted to experience it. Not that I was going to become a scuba diver. And after doing skydiving once, I thought, enough of that.
But you tried it.
But I tried it,
That's right.
and it was exciting, and I enjoyed it. And I've just felt like trying things is the way you experience it. But I think it's people's exposure or lack of exposure towards disability that really defines what they think. And I think that is where centers like ours, the ability of the show, doing a show that shows people who are people with disabilities, being able to have a conversation, being able to be articulate, knowing that we go to work every day like everybody else, and we have lives that we live good and bad, like everybody else.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
it's all not good and it's all not bad, but it is like everybody else because that's who we are. We're just people trying to have a better life. And I think the attitudinal barriers is always a challenge. I think it'll always be a challenge because of those reasons that I articulate. If you don't know someone, you don't have that firsthand experience, so you always are jaded to what I call them, those dopey movies of nobody ever wants to live with everybody wants to kill themselves somehow.
Well, it's the image, the constant imagery,
it's that
right?
imagery that you can't live if you have a disability because it's so overwhelmingly difficult. Well, I'm not saying it's easy because I think we'll both agree that it has its challenges to have a disability where you have to be honest about that. But it's worth living. And I think that's always the thing, to have people understand that life, being alive, is really what it's about in order to enjoy one's life.
So how do you see, yes, of course, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, no.
How do you see the independent living philosophy then continuing in light of this? Where do you see it evolving toward?
I once upon a time thought we would put ourselves out of business. I was naive.
Right.
And I think you and I have talked about that, that I thought the day would come where everything would be accessible, services would be there, people would be accepted, and we would just be part of the mainstream of people. That was a long time ago that I felt that way. I don't feel that way any longer. After all these years, all the needs that continue to come up, sometimes, unfortunately, some of the same issues continue to come up again and again. Like, how do you stay out of an institution? How do you receive the services that might help you be able to get dressed in the morning to get to work? How do you get those services? How do you pay for those services? Those are challenges that we face today as much as we faced them 30 years ago, 37 years ago when I started the center. It was that way then, and it's kind of, in so many ways, it's the same. You know, when we talk about what are the major barriers towards disabled people, it's still employment, okay? It's still transportation, even though Westchester County has done a great job with transportation for the disabled.
And
paratransit. In other parts of the state, there is no paratransit like Westchester has. And I give people like Rich Manley credit for starting that, and Evan Latana at the Office for the Disabled for continuing. But that in itself was a fight, that we had a fight to get that transportation, but it doesn't exist everywhere. So, and the idea of employment, people with disabilities, we know the unemployment rate is still tremendous.
It's about, I think, 64% nationwide.
If it was still that high for the general public, there would be riots in the streets because people would be going like, what the heck?
So do you feel that getting back to the attitudinal discrimination, that drives the lack of employment? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of stigma associated with disability. The lack of public policies that can promote, healthcare and parity healthcare for people with, say, psychiatric disabilities, transportation options. All
of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, because there are pieces to all of that are the barriers that still have kept the majority of disabled people with that inability to make a transition, like what one expects of one's children's, what one expects of one's life, that it is a challenge, it is difficult, and that has been the fight for 37 years with independent living.
But it's changed for you a little bit at Wilk, right? I mean, the center is now different, obviously, now than it was when you first opened it.
Well,
and you've evolved in a different way. Your programming is different now.
It's grown. We've received other funding to do other things because of that advocacy that people with disabilities
Right.
have done, advocacy that parents have done,
Right.
advocacy to really develop more consciousness amongst service. There also, the cost of institutionalization is so high that it makes sense for government to want people to live in
Absolutely.
the community,
Absolutely.
which sometimes people are surprised about, but it's expensive to have somebody in a nursing home or in some kind of institutional setting because they're not being productive, they're not participating. Forget about the personal effect, which I think most people would rather be as independent as possible and in the community making decisions, and that's being taken away from them when they have to go into a facility. But the cost of maintaining people in facilities is unbelievable. So that for society, it makes sense to develop programs and services for people to stay in the community and be able to enjoy, they're going to enjoy their lives, but
Yeah.
it'll be cheaper. It'll be cheaper, which people sometimes go, well, what do you mean it's cheaper? Yes, it's cheaper. It's expensive to have these brick and mortar places
And also-
that warehouse people.
Absolutely, and I think people don't do as well in institutional settings, right? They get sicker, they're not happy, they're not employed, they're not with their family members. What would you say? Would you say that's probably the most significant problem now facing folks with disabilities? The lack of health care, or the lack of talk about independent living, the lack of ability and resources to live in their own homes in the community
I
that
think
center faces today?
I would have said a few years ago that we had turned the corner on that challenge. I'm not as optimistic right now, partly because of some of the healthcare discussions that
Yeah.
are being had.
Right.
Some of the cost associated with providing insurance for people. That now I kind of am fearful that we are going a little backward in terms of what we may see happening in the next few years. And that may be the new challenge for advocacy, for centers, for other people that care about people with disabilities, is how do we prevent slipping back? We've had so many victories and gains that disabled people have made. I mean, I remember the unemployment rate was closer to 95%
Oh, really?
at one point,
Well,
okay?
that's-
So the fact that we've improved
Sure.
and now it's like 65, 66% has been an improvement. It's not where we would like it to be. With the general public right now, unemployment is like 5, 6%. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so I think we have some challenges, healthcare being on the top of that list, that I really do think we have to be very conscientious of not slipping back, of not thinking that maybe it's better to institutionalize people, that somehow is going to make it cheaper because we'll cut costs.
Well, WIC has been successful, right, with some of our programs. You can talk about the NHTD program for one. We've had the Open Doors. We just got a
We've-
recent grant for.
Many targeted programs that have come through the State Department
Yeah.
of Health, which really are geared towards making sure that people who can live in the community, the services that they need are pulled together so that they can live. Home care services, housing services, some of these services that really make it possible for somebody to live. But if they had the challenge of figuring all that out themselves, they wouldn't be able to meet that challenge because it is a lot of different pieces that have to be pulled together.
Right.
So some of our programs and staff, and you know, programs are based on staff. It's always based on staff. It's people that make programs work, and it's the staff commitment to working with people with disabilities to try to pull together the services that they need. And sometimes it's hard to pull housing together and find accessible, affordable
It's a
housing.
lot of moving pieces.
In this county.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a challenge.
Absolutely.
So it's not so easy. It's not like saying, oh yeah, the person needs an apartment. Okay, we're going to find them an apartment. No, it doesn't work that way because people are on fixed incomes. They do need Section 8 subsidies. It is a challenge. And then the home care challenge of really
Right.
finding a home health aide is becoming more and more difficult because of how inadequately home health aides are paid,
Yeah,
and yet
exactly.
what's expected of them in terms of helping someone. And that, you know, is such a talked about thing these days, about the minimum wage,
Right.
and wanting to pay fast food workers $15, which by all means, I mean, I'm sure, you know, you need a living wage, but we're paying home care workers substantially less than $15.
It's like $13 an hour?
And that's
or 11
high.
actually. That's high,
That's
yeah.
a high. Some,
Right.
I understand, are even getting less than that. So you think you're expecting personal assistance and personal care that a worker would provide somebody, and you want to pay them $13, $11, $13
Right.
an hour?
So
It's
you-
like, huh?
So you have somebody that's highly qualified. As you know, we did a celebration event 2 years ago for the 25th anniversary of the ADA, and our center put together a video, and we called it ADA 25, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. And by the way, if you'd like a copy of that video, just we run our contact information at the closing of the show, and we'll send it to you, a link. But in that video, we highlighted, I think it was 10 folks, all highly qualified, wanting to be employed. One individual, I think, had 2 master's degrees, and none of them could find employment for many reasons. Transportation, lack of health care, inability to find affordable housing, and then just blatant discrimination. People not realizing or just judging them on the face of the disability, not realizing that they had true talents and capabilities. So there's a myriad of issues that folks with disabilities have to deal with. And affordable housing and just having a safe place to live and having the right health care to be secure is paramount. And I know that's some of our major programs at the center, in addition to other things that we do.
And I think that all of those issues and all of those barriers that people face are why the center, you know,
Right.
has strived all these years and expanded, you know, dramatically. I think there are 45 of us on staff
Right.
these days with the Westchester and the Putnam offices. And why there's so many centers around the state is that those issues are the issues that we're working to overcome and trying to assist people in how do you find your way in this thing, and how do you find this thing being life,
Yeah.
and this thing being having the best quality of life in your community. How do you accomplish that? And I think it's hard. It's not easy. Okay, the challenges, I think society does put more challenges than they should. And maybe if people change some of those attitudes, things would be better. But I think it becomes that always having to prove that somehow you are qualified for a job.
Right.
You are capable of being a good employee. You're not going to be a drain on them in terms of what you have to offer. You're going to be an asset to them. And how do you demonstrate that? It's a challenge. It's
a
hard.
challenge. I mean, it is slowly changing, like you said. And I think it's like one person at a time, right? I mean, that's sort of how it.
Our success has been based on helping one person at a time.
Yeah.
You can't think of you're going to help all disabled people. I got over that. Okay,
Yeah.
I thought
Right.
someday, oh my God, you know, that utopia will occur and we will have accomplished it. We've had victories along the way, whether it was victories with different pieces of legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we thought was going to create, everything was going to open up, and now we can look back 27 years later and go,
Right.
It didn't quite accomplish everything. It did accomplish a lot, but it didn't accomplish everything. And that becomes where it continues. The struggle, the fight, the challenges continue both individually and collectively as agencies, as organizations that are fighting to help people try to figure that out for themselves. And I think the challenge in audience members watching this is always thinking about how do you deal with people with disabilities?
Right.
Do you think they're less than? Do you think that they're capable?
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that you should feel like, oh gosh, I should feel bad that somehow I think somebody's not capable. You may not know someone. You may never have talked to them. So
Lack
the
of
thing
awareness,
is,
right?
how are you
Yeah.
educating yourself about knowing people and really giving somebody the opportunity, right? That's what we always talk about is give somebody an opportunity to demonstrate who
Right.
they are.
Exactly.
And that they can be successful for your organization in a job setting.
Absolutely.
But generally that you give them an opportunity to just say, engage, engage in a dialogue versus assuming that they're not capable of
Well,
talking.
that's the challenge. I mean, we have a couple of minutes left, Joe. I just want to ask you on a personal
Sure.
level, as someone with a disability, what do you feel is how do you feel people perceive you, or what do you think is the most significant misperception about you on the part of the public?
I think, it's always interesting. I've been disabled for 40 years plus now, and there's not a day that doesn't go by that if I'm not putting my chair in the car, somebody
yes.
says to me, "Can I help you?" Well, I haven't needed help for 40 years. I haven't needed help, and yet every day. Now they're well-meaning. I used to take offense that somehow thought that I needed help. What do you mean? You think I need help?
Right.
Now I realize that they're just trying to be helpful. But I think that idea of thinking that I've always felt like if I need help, I'm going to ask for it because I'm more than capable of asking. And yet most people might not know that. So I think when I think about those challenges, I always do think about when somebody sees me, do they see me as a capable man that has a life, that has lived, that runs a program that's a fairly large not-for-profit in this county and has done so successfully, for the last 37 years? Or do they just see some guy that they see as, that poor unfortunate guy in a chair?
Well, that's the ultimate question,
And
right?
that
Because
is the ultimate
they see the
question.
wheelchair and then maybe the snap judgment of disability dependency, and then after someone engages you in conversation, it's like, oh, well,
And how do we overcome that?
And how do you overcome
How do we
it?
overcome
Through
that
awareness,
attitude?
through raising awareness, through shows like this, through just
That's
being in
all
the
we can do.
community. And
That's
that's
all
what we
we can
do.
do.
So, Joe, we have just a few moments. And if someone wants to get in touch with the center or
Sure.
you, how do we go about doing that?
It's obviously the Westchester Independent Living Center. Our telephone number is 914-682-3926. Call the center. Somebody will intake you, get some information about you, and then figure out who the most appropriate person is. Please don't ask for Joe Bravo because you won't get Joe Bravo, but you will get somebody on staff that will assist you and try to
Great.
link you to the services
Excellent.
that you're going to need.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thank
You're very
you.
welcome,
And we'll
Lisa.
have you
Thanks
back
for
to have
having
more
me.
conversations.
Please.
So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And please, we hope to hear from you.